All right, so picture this. You just inherited a ton of land.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, right? Could be anything. A huge forest,
Okay.
maybe a desert, who knows?
Yeah.
But here's the thing. You're now in charge of making sure this land, this whole ecosystem, thrives.
Whoa.
Yeah, no pressure, right? So where do you even begin? Well, that's what we're diving into today.
Okay. Sounds
We're
good.
talking ecosystems, how they work, how to make sense of it all. And to guide us, we've got ecosystems.pdf, which is full of insights.
Nice.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. One of the things that really stood out to me is this idea that landscapes, they're not just static, they're always changing.
Right.
And this process, it's called ecological succession.
Okay. I see.
It's kind of like, have you ever seen those time lapses of like a plant growing?
Yeah, yeah.
It's like that, but on a huge scale, over like centuries even.
Wow, that's wild.
It is wild. So let's break it down.
Okay.
This ecological succession.
Right.
Our source talks about two main types, primary and secondary.
Okay.
A primary succession, that's like starting from scratch. Imagine a volcano erupts, creates a brand new island.
Wow.
Total blank slate, right?
Yeah.
That's where primary succession kicks in.
Okay, so what happens?
I think you'd be the perfect person to tell me.
Okay, so you've got this barren rock, right? Nothing there. But then these little pioneers start to show up. We're talking lichens, those crusty things you see on rocks.
Oh, yeah. They look like they're part of the rock almost.
Exactly. And they seem super basic, but they're actually breaking down the rock, slowly creating a tiny bit of soil.
They're like the first step.
Exactly. And once you've got that little bit of soil, then mosses can start to grow, then ferns. Give it enough time, you might even get grasses, then shrubs.
Wow.
And then centuries later, you might end up with a whole forest where there was just like barren rock before.
That's incredible. From nothing to a whole forest. Those lichens are like ecological superheroes or something.
I like it. They pave the way for everything else.
They really do. So that's primary succession, but we also have secondary succession, and our source says that happens after things like forest fires.
Right.
Which, I mean, feels a lot more common than a volcano popping up.
Definitely. And there's a key difference. Imagine that same forest, but now it's been swept by a fire.
Okay.
Devastating, right?
Yeah.
But here, the soil's still there. That's the big difference.
So it's not starting from zero this time.
Exactly. It's like nature gets a head start. And because of that, secondary succession can be a lot faster. A great example is the 1988 Yellowstone fires.
Oh, yeah. I remember hearing about those.
Huge fires, right. Seemed like a disaster. But because the soil was okay, the ecosystem bounced back so much quicker.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Within a few years, there was new growth everywhere. It's like a testament to how resilient nature can be.
That's actually really reassuring to hear.
Yeah. It's a good reminder that even after what seems like total destruction, there's hope.
Totally. Okay, so we've talked about how these landscapes change over time.
Right.
But what about what makes them different in the first place? Like, why do we have rainforests in some spots and then deserts in others?
That's where climate comes in, big time. Think temperature and precipitation. Those are like the master architects of ecosystems.
They decide what lives where.
Totally. Like picture drawing a line from the North Pole down to the equator.
Okay, got it.
As you go along that line, you're going to hit all these different climate zones, right? And each zone, it's going to have its own unique set of plants and animals that can survive there.
So different climate, different ecosystem. Makes sense.
Climate really is key.
Okay, I'm ready for a world tour of these climate zones. And I know just the place to start.
Oh, yeah.
The tundra. Get ready for some serious chill, because we're talking sub-zero temperatures, icy winds. Like Earth's walk-in freezer.
Sounds intense.
Yeah.
But you're right, the tundra is definitely a unique environment, that's for sure.
So what can even survive in a place like that? Are we talking like microscopic life forms clinging to rocks?
Well, you'll definitely find your fair share of mosses and lichens. They're tough enough for just about anywhere. But there are actually flowering plants too, believe it or not.
Really? I wouldn't have guessed that.
Oh, yeah. You've got things like low-growing shrubs, sedges, even some surprisingly beautiful wildflowers that make an appearance during the short summer.
Hold on. Summer in the tundra. How short are we talking here?
Think more like weeks than months. The growing season up there is incredibly short, so those plants have to be quick about it.
Wow, they don't waste any time.
Yeah.
So they sprout up, soak up some sun, and that's it.
Pretty much. They've adapted to make the most of those brief weeks of sunlight. They often grow really close to the ground, too, to stay warm and avoid the wind.
Talk about making the best of a chilly situation.
But, okay, enough about the plants. What about the animals? I'm picturing something out of an Ice Age documentary.
You're not far off. You've got your caribou and reindeer up there munching away on those hardy plants.
And I'm guessing where you have herbivores, you're bound to have predators too, right?
You know it. The Arctic wolf definitely comes to mind. They're masters of survival in that environment.
Okay, so paint me a picture. What makes them so well suited to the tundra?
Well, for starters, they've got that thick, white fur that provides incredible insulation from the cold and helps them blend into the snowy landscape.
Camouflage and a winter coat all in one. Nature is so cool. So we're talking wolves hunting caribou across this frozen expanse. It sounds like a scene straight out of National Geographic. It's a testament to the adaptability of life. Even in these seemingly desolate places, you find such incredible biodiversity and fascinating survival strategies. It's truly remarkable.
Okay, I'm officially impressed by the tundra. It's not just an empty freezer after all. But speaking of impressive adaptations, our next stop is the taiga, or boreal forest. This one brings to mind vast evergreen forests, a bit less extreme than the tundra, but still pretty chilly, right?
Exactly. The taiga forms this almost unbroken band of coniferous forest across the northern hemisphere. Imagine towering spruce, fir, and pine trees stretching as far as the eye can see.
Wow, our source mentions it's the world's largest terrestrial biome. So we've gone from the stark beauty of the tundra to this massive evergreen world. What kind of creatures thrive in this environment?
Well, if you're a fan of iconic wildlife, the taiga won't disappoint. This is where you'll find moose, the largest deer species on Earth, browsing on those coniferous trees.
Moose, I love them. They're like gentle giants.
They're pretty incredible. And of course, let's not forget about the predators, like the elusive lynx with its distinctive tufted ears and those incredible snowshoe feet you mentioned earlier.
Wait, tell me more about those snowshoe feet. How exactly do they work?
It's all about surface area. Those wide paws act like natural snowshoes, distributing the lynx's weight so it can walk on top of the snow instead of sinking in. It's a perfect example of how evolution equips animals for their specific environments.
That's brilliant. Nature thinks of everything. But the taiga isn't just about those charismatic megafauna, is it? What else makes this biome tick?
The taiga actually plays a critical role in regulating the global climate. Those vast forests store enormous amounts of carbon, acting as a massive carbon sink.
Wow, so even though most of us don't live in the taiga, what happens there affects us all. It really drives home the interconnectedness of our planet, doesn't it?
Exactly, it's all connected.
Speaking of interconnectedness, let's move from the evergreen expanse of the taiga to a biome that might feel a bit closer to home for many of our listeners. The temperate deciduous forest.
Ah, yes, a biome known for its constantly changing scenery.
Exactly. I'm picturing those vibrant reds, oranges, and yellows of New England autumn. There's a far cry from the frozen landscapes we've just visited. But even with all this familiar beauty, there's a more complex history here. Our source mentions the impact of European settlers on these forests. What happened there?
Yeah, it's not always a happy story. When European settlers arrived in North America, they saw these vast forests as a resource to be exploited. They cleared huge swaths of land for agriculture and timber, dramatically altering the landscape.
It's a good reminder that even in these seemingly familiar biomes, there's a delicate balance that we, as humans, have often disrupted. But it's not all doom and gloom, is it? Our source also talks about reforestation efforts.
Exactly. There's a growing movement to restore these forests, recognizing their importance not just for biodiversity, but also for our own well-being. After all, forests provide us with clean air, water, and even help regulate the climate.
Right. They do so much for us. It's a good reminder that we can all play a part in protecting these vital ecosystems. Speaking of protection, our next stop takes us to a biome that's often shrouded in mist and mystery, the temperate rainforest. Now, I have to admit, when I hear rainforest, I immediately picture those steamy jungles near the equator. What makes a temperate rainforest different?
You're right, the word rainforest often evokes images of those tropical paradises. But as you might guess, temperate rainforests are much cooler than their tropical counterparts. They occur in regions with high rainfall and moderate temperatures, like the Pacific Northwest of North America or the western coast of New Zealand's South Island.
Okay, so imagine this. We're walking through a temperate rainforest. What's towering above us? Paint me a picture.
Get ready for some serious tree envy. These forests are dominated by towering evergreens like Douglas firs, Sitka spruce, and those majestic redwoods, some of the tallest trees on Earth. The air is thick with the scent of moss and damp earth, and the forest floor is a lush carpet of ferns and fungi.
It sounds magical. But, like many of the biomes we've discussed, temperate rainforests face their own set of challenges. Our source mentions the ongoing tension between logging interests and conservation efforts in these areas.
Absolutely. You've hit on a critical point. Temperate rainforests are incredibly valuable for their timber, but it's crucial that we find ways to manage these forests sustainably. That means balancing economic needs with the long-term health of the ecosystem.
For sure. It's all about finding that balance. All right, ready to crank up the heat and humidity. I think it's time we finally venture into the tropical rainforest. This is the one I've been waiting for.
Laughs. Get ready to be amazed. Tropical rainforests are like the biodiversity hotspots of our planet, home to an estimated half of all plant and animal species on Earth. It's an explosion of life, with a symphony of sounds and a kaleidoscope of colors.
Okay, I'm picturing those classic nature documentaries with monkeys swinging through the trees and colorful birds flitting about. But there's more to a rainforest than meets the eye, right? Our source mentions that these forests have 4 distinct layers.
Absolutely. Think of it like a multi-story apartment building for plants and animals.
Yeah.
You've got the forest floor, the understory, the canopy, and then the emergent layer where those giant trees poke through the top. And each layer supports its own unique community of life.
That's amazing. Talk about maximizing space. But here's something that blew my mind. Rainforest soil is actually really bad for farming. That seems counterintuitive given how lush everything is. What's the deal with that?
It's one of those nature's irony moments. You'd think with all that lush growth, the soil would be incredibly fertile, right? But the reality is that most of the nutrients in a rainforest are locked up in the vegetation itself, not the soil.
So it's like a closed loop. The nutrients are constantly being recycled within the rainforest itself.
Exactly. And the heavy rainfall in these regions tends to leach nutrients from the soil, making it even less fertile over time.
That's a good reminder that appearances can be deceiving. All right, we've explored the lush rainforests, but for our next stop, we're going from one extreme to the other. Buckle up, because we're heading to the desert.
From the steamy tropics to the arid desert. It's a dramatic shift, for sure. But just like those frozen tundras, deserts are a testament to the resilience and adaptability of life.
I'll admit, I used to think of deserts as vast, empty wastelands. But our source makes it clear. Deserts are teeming with unique life forms that have adapted to thrive in these harsh conditions.
You're right, life in the desert is all about water conservation and beating the heat.
So what kind of crazy adaptations are we talking about?
Well, take cacti, for example. They've evolved those fleshy stems to store water, and their spines aren't just for show. Those spines actually help reduce water loss and provide some shade. And then you have animals like kangaroo rats that can survive their entire lives without ever taking a sip of water.
Wait, seriously? They get all their moisture from their food? That's amazing. But deserts aren't all sunshine and cacti, are they? Our source also mentions the threat of desertification. What exactly is that?
Desertification is a serious environmental issue where fertile land degrades and becomes more desert-like over time. It's often caused by a combination of factors like deforestation, overgrazing, and unsustainable agricultural practices.
So it's like we're accidentally creating more deserts.
Unfortunately, that's often the case. It's a complex issue with far-reaching consequences.
That's a sobering thought. It highlights the impact we have on these delicate ecosystems, even in places we might not think about very often. Speaking of places we might not think about, let's journey to our final biome, grasslands.
Ah, grasslands. They might not have the towering trees of a rainforest or the stark beauty of a desert, but they're arguably one of the most important biomes on Earth, especially for us humans. They're the breadbaskets of the world.
That's right. Our source talks about different types of grasslands, from the savannas of Africa with their iconic acacia trees to the prairies of North America, which were once home to massive herds of bison. What are some of the key differences between these grasslands?
The main differences come down to climate and the types of grasses that dominate. Savannas are typically warmer and drier with those scattered trees, while prairies tend to be more temperate and wetter with taller grasses.
And of course, each grassland has its own unique cast of characters. We can't forget those iconic herds of zebras and wildebeest roaming the savanna, or the prairie dogs that play such a vital role in maintaining the health of North American grasslands.
Absolutely. But grasslands are facing their own set of challenges. Overgrazing, habitat loss, and unsustainable agricultural practices are all taking a toll on these vital ecosystems.
You know, it's easy to forget that a lot of the food on our tables comes from grasslands. Wheat, corn, rice, they all rely on healthy grasslands.
That's right. We need to pay more attention to how we manage these vital landscapes. The choices we make today will have a direct impact on our ability to feed a growing population in the future.
It's a good reminder that we're all connected to these ecosystems, whether we realize it or not. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground, literally from the frozen tundra to the sun-drenched savanna. But before we wrap up our epic biome adventure, there's one last frontier to explore.
Time to dive in. We can't talk about ecosystems without talking about aquatic environments. They cover over 70% of our planet's surface, and they're just as diverse and fascinating as their terrestrial counterparts.
Okay, deep divers, time to get our feet wet, literally. We're switching gears from solid ground to the watery depths of aquatic ecosystems. I have to admit I'm a little out of my element here, but our source makes it clear. We can't talk about ecosystems without understanding the underwater world.
Absolutely. And just like on land, there's incredible diversity in aquatic environments. We're talking about everything from rushing rivers to the deep ocean floor.
So what are the big players that shape life underwater? I'm guessing sunlight is pretty crucial, just like it is for my houseplants.
You're spot on. Light availability is key. Think about how sunlight penetrates the water and how that influences where plants can grow and where animals can thrive. Then there's oxygen content, salinity, water temperature, and nutrient availability. These factors vary widely depending on whether we're talking about freshwater or saltwater environments.
Okay, let's break it down. First up, freshwater ecosystems. What comes to mind for you when you think about those? I'm picturing a crystal clear mountain stream rushing over rocks.
Those are definitely a great example of flowing freshwater ecosystems. Think about the power of those currents, constantly shaping the environment, carrying nutrients downstream, and creating those dramatic rapids and waterfalls.
So it's a very dynamic habitat. What about those creatures who prefer calmer waters?
That's where lakes and ponds come in. These standing water ecosystems are teeming with life, from microscopic plankton to fish, turtles, and even alligators in some places.
Our source mentions that lakes and ponds are particularly susceptible to pollution. That's a sobering thought. Why are they so vulnerable?
Because they're relatively contained systems, pollutants that enter a lake or pond tend to stick around longer. Think about runoff from agricultural fields or urban areas carrying fertilizers, pesticides, and other harmful substances. It can have a devastating impact on the delicate balance of these ecosystems.
It highlights the importance of protecting these delicate freshwater ecosystems. Speaking of important, our source calls wetlands biological supermarkets, which seems like high praise. What makes them so special?
Wetlands are some of the most productive ecosystems on Earth. They're incredibly effective at filtering pollutants, providing habitat for a vast array of species, and even mitigating flooding. Think of them as giant sponges that soak up excess water and slowly release it, protecting surrounding areas.
Wow, wetlands are the unsung heroes of the ecosystem world. Okay, ready to brave the open ocean? I'm imagining massive whales, colorful coral reefs, and maybe a few sharks lurking in the depths.
You've got the right idea. Open oceans cover the majority of our planet and are home to a mind-boggling array of life. We're still discovering new species in those depths.
It's amazing to think about those vast stretches of water. Our source mentions that coral reefs are particularly diverse, even more so than tropical rainforests. That seems impossible. How can they support so much life?
Coral reefs are like underwater cities, providing food and shelter for a dazzling array of fish, invertebrates, and other marine life. They're built by tiny animals called corals that secrete calcium carbonate skeletons, creating those intricate structures we associate with reefs. But they're incredibly fragile and threatened by pollution, climate change, and destructive fishing practices.
A reminder that even in those vast oceans, human actions have a profound impact. All right, before we wrap up our aquatic adventure, let's talk about those areas where freshwater and saltwater meet estuaries.
Estuaries are like the mixing bowls of the aquatic world. They're incredibly productive ecosystems, supporting a unique blend of freshwater and saltwater species.
Our source specifically mentions their role as nurseries for many ocean fish. Why are estuaries so important for young fish?
Estuaries offer a protected environment with abundant food sources and shelter from predators. They're like the perfect nurseries for many commercially valuable fish species to grow and thrive before heading out to the open ocean.
Wow, we've only just dipped our toes into the water. But it's clear that aquatic ecosystems are just as complex and vital as their land-based counterparts.
Absolutely. And just like on land, it's crucial to understand the delicate balance of these ecosystems and how our actions can impact them, from the tiniest freshwater pond to the vast open ocean.
So deep divers, next time you water those houseplants, take a moment to think about the incredible web of life they represent, a web that extends far beyond your windowsill to encompass the entire planet. The humbling thought, isn't it? Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep. So last time we were trekking through the tundra, bundled up in our warmest gear, but now I think it's time we ditch the parkas and maybe grab a machete because we are headed to the tropics.
Sounds like someone's ready for a virtual vacation.
Who isn't? But seriously, the tropics are more than just a vacation destination. They're home to some of the most biodiverse ecosystems on Earth. We're talking tropical rainforests.
Exactly. And when it comes to biodiversity, tropical rainforests are like the rock stars of our planet.
Okay, I'm picturing those lush green jungles, teeming with life monkeys swinging through the trees, colorful birds everywhere, insects I've never even seen before. Am I close?
You're getting warmer, but there's more to a rainforest than meets the eye. Our source talks about these forests having 4 distinct layers. It's like a multi-story apartment building for plants and animals.
Okay, so we're not just talking about what's happening on the forest floor. There's a whole lot going on above our heads.
Exactly. You've got the forest floor, then the understory above that, then the canopy where most of the action is, and finally the emergent layer where those giant trees poke through the top.
Wow, talk about maximizing space. It's like a whole other world up there. But here's something that blew my mind. Rainforest soil is actually really bad for farming. That seems counterintuitive given how lush everything is. What's the deal with that?
It's one of those nature's ironies. You'd think with all that life, all of that lush growth, the soil would be incredibly fertile, but it's actually the opposite.
So what's going on? Why is rainforest soil so nutrient poor?
It all comes down to how nutrients are cycled in a rainforest. You see, most of the nutrients aren't actually stored in the soil itself. They're locked up in the vegetation.
So it's like a closed loop. The plants take up the nutrients, and then when they die and decompose, those nutrients are released back into the system.
Exactly. And to make matters even more interesting, the heavy rainfall in these regions tends to leach nutrients from the soil, making it even less fertile over time.
So it's like this constant battle to hold on to those precious nutrients. It's a good reminder that appearances can be deceiving. What we see as a lush green paradise is actually a highly competitive environment where plants have to fight for every last nutrient.
Absolutely. It's a delicate balance and one that's easily disrupted.
Speaking of delicate balances, our next stop takes us from the steamy tropics to the other end of the spectrum.
Right.
We're going from one extreme to the other. Buckle up, because we're headed to the desert.
From lush rainforests to arid deserts, it's a dramatic shift for sure, but just like those frozen tundras, deserts are a testament to the resilience and adaptability of life.
You know, I used to think of deserts as these vast, empty wastelands devoid of life. But our source makes it clear deserts are teeming with unique life forms that have figured out how to thrive in these extreme conditions.
You're right. Life in the desert is all about adaptation. It's about water conservation and beating the heat.
Okay, so give me an example. What kind of crazy adaptations are we talking about?
We'll take cacti, for example. They've evolved those fleshy stems to store water, and those spines, they're not just for show.
I was just going to ask about those. They always seemed a little intimidating.
Those spines actually serve a few purposes. They help reduce water loss by providing some shade, and they also deter thirsty animals from taking a bite.
It's like their own personal suit of armor. Talk about being well-equipped for a harsh environment. But cacti aren't the only ones with tricks up their sleeves. Yeah. What about the animals? How do they handle the lack of water in those scorching temperatures?
Deserts are full of amazing animal adaptations. Take kangaroo rats, for example. These little guys can survive their entire lives without ever taking a sip of water.
Wait, really? They get all their moisture from their food?
Exactly. They've evolved to extract every last drop of moisture from the seeds and plants they eat. And they're incredibly efficient at conserving water, too, producing highly concentrated urine and even absorbing water from the air they exhale.
Wow, that's some next-level water conservation. It's amazing how life finds a way to adapt even in the most extreme environments.
But speaking of challenges, our source also mentions the threat of desertification. What exactly is that?
Desertification is a serious environmental issue where fertile land degrades and becomes more desert-like over time.
So it's like we're accidentally creating more deserts.
Unfortunately, that's often the case. It's a complex issue often driven by a combination of factors like deforestation, overgrazing, and unsustainable agricultural practices.
So it's like a double whammy. We're losing fertile land and potentially exacerbating the effects of climate change all at the same time.
It's a stark reminder that our actions have consequences, and that even in these seemingly desolate environments, our choices can have a ripple effect. It's a sobering thought, but also a call to action. We need to be mindful of how we're impacting these delicate ecosystems and work towards more sustainable practices. But for now, let's shift gears one last time and explore a biome that's often overlooked but incredibly important. We're talking about grasslands.
Ah, grasslands. They might not have the towering trees of a rainforest or the stark beauty of a desert, but they're essential to life on Earth as we know it.
Absolutely. And they're often called the breadbaskets of the world for a reason.
Exactly. Grasslands are where we grow a lot of our staple crops, like wheat, corn, and rice. They're essential for feeding a growing global population.
Our source talks about different types of grasslands, from the savannas of Africa with their iconic acacia trees to the prairies of North America, which were once home to massive herds of bison. What are some of the key differences between these grasslands?
The main differences come down to climate, and the types of grasses that dominate savannas are typically warmer and drier with those scattered trees you mentioned, while prairies tend to be more temperate and wetter with taller grasses.
And of course, each type of grassland has its own unique cast of characters.
Hmm.
We can't forget those iconic herds of zebras and wildebeest roaming the African savanna, or the prairie dogs that play such a vital role in maintaining the health of North American grasslands.
Absolutely. But as with many of the biomes we've discussed, grasslands are facing their own set of challenges. Overgrazing, habitat loss, and unsustainable agricultural practices are all taking a toll on these vital ecosystems.
It's easy to forget that a lot of the food on our tables comes from grasslands. Wheat, corn, rice, they all rely on healthy grasslands. So when we talk about protecting grasslands, we're not just talking about protecting biodiversity. We're talking about protecting our own food security.
Exactly. We need to find ways to manage these grasslands sustainably so they can continue to provide for both people and wildlife for generations to come. It's about finding that balance between our needs and the needs of the planet.
Well said.
Yeah.
Okay, we've journeyed from the frozen tundra to the sun-drenched savanna, and we've explored the lush rainforests and the arid deserts. We've covered a lot of ground, literally.
We've seen how life adapts and thrives in all sorts of extreme environments. It's truly remarkable.
It is. But before we wrap up our epic biome adventure, there's one last frontier to explore. We've covered the land. Now it's time to dive into the water.
Time to get our feet wet and explore the incredible diversity of aquatic ecosystems.
All right, deep divers. It's time to trade in our hiking boots for some flippers.
I think I left mine in the car.
Oh no, are you sure? Because we're diving headfirst into aquatic ecosystems.
Yeah. I'm game. Let's do it.
That's the spirit. So we've explored all these amazing land-based biomes, but now it's time to see what's going on beneath the surface.
And let me tell you, it's a whole other world down there, just as diverse and fascinating as anything you'll find on land.
Our source mentions that light availability is a big factor in aquatic environments, which makes sense because even my houseplants need sunlight to survive.
Exactly. Light is crucial. It's like the fuel that drives the whole system in many ways.
Yeah.
The deeper you go, the less light there is, which affects everything from where plants can grow to what kinds of creatures can survive.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So besides light, what else shapes these underwater worlds?
Well, you've got oxygen content, which is obviously crucial for anything that breathes underwater. And then there's salinity, the saltiness of the water, which varies widely between freshwater and saltwater environments.
Okay, so right off the bat, we're talking about two very different types of ecosystems.
Yeah.
Freshwater and saltwater.
Exactly, each with its own unique set of challenges and adaptations.
So let's start with freshwater. I'm picturing those crystal clear mountain streams we talked about earlier, the ones that are teeming with fish.
Those are a great example of what we call flowing water ecosystems.
Yeah.
They're constantly moving, which creates a very dynamic environment.
Right, so it's not like a lake or a pond where things are relatively still.
Exactly. Those flowing waters create currents that shape the environment, carry nutrients downstream, and even create those stunning rapids and waterfalls you see in nature documentaries.
I'm starting to see why those ecosystems are so unique. So what about those creatures that prefer calmer waters? Where do they fit in?
That's where lakes and ponds come in. They're like the still lifes of the freshwater world. These standing water ecosystems are teeming with their own unique forms of life, from microscopic plankton to fish turtles and even alligators in some cases.
Our source mentions that lakes and ponds are particularly vulnerable to pollution. Why is that?
It's because they're relatively contained systems. Think of them like big bowls. Pollutants that enter a lake or pond tend to stick around longer, unlike a flowing river where the water is constantly moving and diluting those pollutants.
So runoff from farms or cities, all that stuff can really build up in lakes and ponds.
Exactly. It's a big concern because those pollutants can disrupt the delicate balance of these ecosystems, harming wildlife and even affecting water quality for human use.
It highlights the importance of protecting these freshwater ecosystems. They're more fragile than we realize.
Yeah.
Speaking of important, our source calls wetlands biological supermarkets, which sounds pretty impressive. What makes them so special?
Wetlands are some of the most productive ecosystems on the planet. They're like giant filters cleaning pollutants out of the water, and they provide habitat for a huge diversity of plants and animals. They're also incredibly important for flood control.
Wetlands acting as flood control. I never thought about it that way. How does that work?
Wetlands act like giant sponges, soaking up excess water during heavy rains and releasing it slowly over time. This helps to prevent flooding in surrounding areas, and it also helps to recharge groundwater supplies.
Wow. Wetlands are like the unsung heroes of the ecosystem world. They do so much for us behind the scenes. Okay, so we've tackled fresh water now. Let's dive into the deep end. We're talking oceans, right?
Oceans are like the final frontier. They cover over 70% of our planet's surface, and we're still discovering new species down there all the time.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
It's hard to even fathom how much there is to explore down there. Our source mentions coral reefs being incredibly biodiverse, even more so than tropical rainforests. How is that even possible?
It's true. Coral reefs are like underwater cities teeming with life. They provide food and shelter for a dazzling array of fish, invertebrates, and other marine creatures.
But what makes them so biodiverse? What's their secret?
It's the structure of the reefs themselves. They're built by these tiny animals called corals, which secrete calcium carbonate skeletons that create these intricate structures.
So it's like they're building their own little apartment complexes underwater.
In a way, yes. And those structures create a huge variety of microhabitats that support all sorts of different species. But sadly, coral reefs are under threat from pollution, climate change, and destructive fishing practices.
It's a reminder that even in those vast oceans, human actions have consequences.
Okay, before we wrap up our aquatic adventure, let's talk about estuaries. Those are the areas where rivers meet the sea, right?
Exactly. Estuaries are like the mixing bowls of the aquatic world. You've got fresh water mixing with salt water, creating a unique environment that supports a blend of both freshwater and marine species. I remember reading that estuaries are super important as nurseries for a lot of ocean fish.
They are. Estuaries provide a protected environment with plenty of food and shelter from predators, making them ideal nurseries for many fish species.
So it's like their first foray into the wider world.
Exactly. They can grow and mature in these relatively safe waters before heading out to the open ocean.
Amazing. Well, deep divers, we've journeyed from the mountaintops to the ocean depths, explored scorching deserts and lush rainforests. It's been quite the adventure.
It really has. We've seen how life thrives in all sorts of incredible environments and learned about the interconnectedness of it all.
It's humbling to think about all those ecosystems working together, from the tiniest microorganisms to the largest whales. And it's a good reminder that we're part of that web of life, too.
We have a responsibility to protect these ecosystems, not just for the sake of biodiversity, but for our own well-being as well.
Absolutely. We've seen how human actions can have both positive and negative impacts on these delicate systems. It's up to us to make choices that ensure a healthy planet for generations to come. So next time you're out in nature, whether it's your own backyard or a national park, take a moment to appreciate the wonders of the natural world, and remember, everything is connected. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.